Also, that other one, that image of the two olive trees kind of pouring into the menorah, reminds me of this as well, because Queen Esther, right, had the power as the queen. And then we have Mordecai, who was sort of the shepherd, and he was given the signet ring, and the two of them are uplifting the people. So much so that people outside of the nation of Israel then became Israelites and started following the Lord because of what those two did. Hey, and welcome back to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and I'm reading through the Bible in 365 days. You may have been here before, and if you are, I'm very excited that you are reading your Bible and joining me. If this is your first time, I am using the chronological Bible reading plan to read my Bible all the way through, and it is available online at oneyearbibleonline.com. You would go on, download a chronological Bible reading plan, which means it's in historical order, right, from beginning to end. It is not how you crack open the Bible. So you would need the reading plan in order to join along with me, because it's out of order in the way it's in context in the actual Bible that you have. So today is day 259, or you could just hang here and listen to what I read today. So it's day 259. It is September 15th, and our reading today is Esther 5 through 10. So here comes your 2-minute, very quick history. 2 minutes tops. If you've been with me before, you can fast forward through it. We are with the nation of Israel, and this is really important. It is a people group that follow the Lord. The Lord has chosen this people group. Way back in time, he chose Abraham, who was a son of Shem, who was a son of Noah, and he chose Abraham to carry on the covenant with him. So actually to establish really a covenant with him. And then Abraham had a son, Isaac. He established the covenant with Isaac. Isaac had a son, Jacob. He established the covenant with Jacob. And then Jacob had 12 sons. Those 12 sons moved into Egypt for a time. And then they had sons, and they grew the nation, right? It got really, really big. And then they stopped really following the Lord like they were supposed to. They still knew who he was. They still had some of their rituals that they did for him, but they really kind of did a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a lot of following the Egyptian gods. The Lord allowed Egypt to come up and suppress them, right? So like Egypt was able to get bigger. It was able to overpower them and suppress them. And then they wound up taking them over and enslaving them for hundreds of years until they cried out to the Lord. Once they cried out to the Lord sent them Moses, and Moses, along with his brother Aaron, brought them up out of Egypt. They kind of wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. That's the story of everything I say, I feel like, every day. And then Joshua, who followed up on Moses, and then brought them into the promised land, which was the land of Canaan. Once in the land of Canaan, they lived a few hundred years without a leader. They just had judges, and they were kind of living amongst as nations. And then they cried out for a king. They got King Saul. King Saul did not follow the Lord. So then the Lord sent them King David. King David did follow the Lord. And so the Lord promised that he would keep a covenant with David that would have the scepter or the kingship on the line of David throughout all time. The nation then split in two. There was the northern kingdom, there was the southern kingdom. So it was Israel and Judah. Judah always had a line of David on the throne. Israel had all different kind of kings on the throne. And then Assyria came in and overtook Israel. Babylon came in and overtook the nation of Israel. And then God really wiped out a lot of the Jewish nation. And then for 70 years, and they were scattered all over. And for 70 years, they lived with the nation of Babylon and kind of scattered all over. Then the nation of Babylon sent them back to kind of repopulate their area, to build another temple. And that's where we find ourselves. I want to just note that every time they were overtaken or taken away or scattered or enslaved, it was always because they turned away from the Lord. The Lord was living and dwelling in and amongst them, and it was never good enough for them. And so they always turned towards something else, whether it was their own rules, or they were following another god, or they were following some wives, or they were following the money, whatever it might be. They always turned away from the Lord. The Lord was always extremely patient with them until he said they're not going to turn back to me until there is some punishment involved. So we find ourselves now in the nation of both Israel and Babylon. So these are Israelites Israelites were told they could go back into the nation of Israel. Not all of them did. And Esther and her uncle or caretaker, I think he might be actually her cousin, but Mordecai both live in the nation of Babylon. Xerxes is the king. And what we have found thus far, I'm really finding this string of sort of like prophetic things in here, like a lot of prophecies seem to be coming true with this story. It really continues for me today. So I want to stick with the literal story, but I'm also going to kind of overlay some of the things that I see that look to be fulfillments of prophecy, some of the patterns that the Lord has been showing since the very beginning, things like that. So in these first four chapters, in the first four chapters, we're up to chapter 5 today. King Xerxes was a king. He had a party. He wanted his wife to come show off a little bit for him. She said no. He took her off the throne, and then he searched for other women as wives. He found Esther to be his wife through a lot of processes. Esther was an Israelite, so she was Jewish, and she did not tell him she was Jewish. So this was a secret to him as of this point. Mordecai was like, make sure you keep this a secret, and he was kind of constantly back and forth and watching her. Once we get into chapter 4, what we find out is that there was this villain, Haman, who again is a guy. He was high up in the ranks of up in the nation with Xerxes, right? So Xerxes kind of honored him, but Mordecai didn't honor him because Mordecai honored the Lord, and so he didn't honor anybody else above the Lord. And that's what a lot of other people were doing. And so Haman like made him his enemy. And he said, not only is Mordecai my enemy, but all Jews are my enemy. And so I'm going to find a way to kill all of them, right? This is what he was trying to do. So he was putting together a plot. And so the last we saw, it said he wrote a letter with the signet ring of the king, and he sent it out to everybody. And he was like, you can say one day and you can annihilate the entire population of them. And so when they found that out, Mordecai found it out. He was wailing at the gates. He was mourning. And Esther went to him and she was like, hey, what's going on? Put on some clothes. You're making a fool of yourself. And he said, listen, you have to go in to the king and you have to save your people. Like, this is kind of your job, is to save your people. And she said, but if I go in there, he could kill me. And he was like, well, these are your people. You have to save your people. And so then she ends and she says, pray and fast, have everybody with you, pray and fast. I'll have everybody with me, pray and fast. And then we're going to see what happens. That's where we find ourselves today. And it says on the third day, we're in Esther 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. Okay, so what we see right after this is it says, as he looks at her, so she's kind of far away. She gets all dressed up. I want to know the importance of this, because what we see is he has the power to turn anybody away. And if he turns you away, he has the power to kill you, right? Because he is the sovereign ruler over this land. He has power and control over all people in his land. He makes all of the rules with the writing of his pen. He gets to do everything. So no matter who comes to him, they are all underneath of him. Nobody has the power that he has, right? And so he can do what he wills with them. I want to make that pretty clear, because that was literal. And of course, we see in some ways that is figurative of the Lord, right? The Lord has the power to do with us what he will. But what we have noted, or what I have noted when I was reading this in the beginning, was that what they're showing us in the beginning of this book was that he was a good king. He gave liberally, right? He gave with liberality is what he says. He showed everybody the kingdom. He took in a clean wife, right? And then he gave her time. He cleansed her, and then he brought her to him. So this is kind of what we're noting about the king. And so when she comes in an honorable way. She dresses herself in the royal robes, and she shows up at the entrance. She doesn't barge her way in. She's not yelling at him. So she's showing him the respect he deserves, right? Because then at any point, he can either offer her his scepter, or he cannot offer her his scepter in order to allow her to speak. Of course, what he does is, as we see, and I think it's because she presented herself the way she did, right? So like, she does what's honorable. And because we have seen, I believe at this point, that he is a good king, nothing else that he would do but would be to accept her, right? He's not someone who hates her. He's not someone who wants to do dirty by people. And so when she presents herself humbly, it says, when Queen Esther standing in the court, when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. I think it's because of the way she presented herself, and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Again, she was doing all of the things that she was supposed to do in accordance with honoring him as the king, right? As the sovereign one, as the leader. So then the king asks, what is it? What's your request? And then he says, even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. So essentially he's saying, because we see this sort of as one of their expressions, essentially he's saying, I'll give you anything. Just ask me. I'll give you anything. Again, does that remind you of anyone, right? Just ask me and I will give you anything that I can give you. If it is in my power to do so, I will give it to you. So that's what he says to her. And then she says, I want you and Haman to come to a banquet that I'm going to prepare for you. So he's like, of course, we're going to bring you at once. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine, the king asked again, now, what is your petition? So this is the second time he asks her. So again, I think there's some power in numbers here. So he says, what's your petition? Because obviously that wasn't her real petition. My petition, my request is this. If the king regards me with favor and it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow. So now she's setting him up with a second banquet. So she's not really giving him her full petition. She's asking or telling him for the second time she's going to request something from him. Then we move down into 5 and it says, Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. This is the villain of the story, or I'm going to call him the enemy. Let's just call him the enemy. This is the enemy. So the enemy is happy because he kind of fished his wish. He wants to destroy all the people and he got what he wanted. And then the queen is honoring him by inviting him and him only to a banquet, right? It was just him and the king. So he should be super happy. So he goes out there happy and high spirits. But this is a big word. He sees Mordecai, and Mordecai is like his arch nemesis. And as soon as he sees Mordecai, and he says that Mordecai like shows him no fear, he's not scared of him or anything like that, he was filled with rage. So nothing is good enough for him. He wants everything. Mordecai not bowing down to him enrages him more than the fact that he's like the second person in command and he's being offered to sit at the queen's banquet with just him and the king. Not good enough. He needs Mordecai. So he calls together his friends, and then, and this is some of the language, how we kind of know he's the enemy. So we know he's the enemy because we're reading as an Israelite, right? But some of this language is really important. Filled with rage is one of them, right? So he's filled with this like overwhelming amount of anger, right? This like anger that like wants to spill out all over the place to the point where he wants to slaughter an entire people group because one of them won't bow down to him and show him the respect he believes he demands. So he says when he sees Mordecai, he was filled with rage. And then it says he goes to his friends and he's boasting to them. So listen to all that he has. Vast wealth, many sons. And then he starts telling about all the way the king has honored him. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king at the banquet she gave. And then he says once again, but this gives me no satisfaction. I have it all. Imagine someone you know, yourself. Imagine if you write a list of all that you have. I have this, 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 I have this. All of these things the Lord has blessed you with. And you go, but I'm telling you, this one person or this one thing or this one job or this one coworker or this one relative, right? Like imagine that. All of this good and all you can cycle about is this one bad thing in your life. This is where we find Haman. Haman is boasting about all of these great things I have, but that Mordecai is such a thorn in my side. I really got to get that guy. His priorities are completely out of whack. He's too worried about this one thing that really has little to no effect on his life. All of it gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. And then his wife is like, ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled. Go get a pole and like go to the king. Like you're the second in command. Go get a pole, 50 cubits, which means like it's like 75 feet. This massive pole. Go get this massive pole and then like set it up and then tell the king, I want to impale Mordecai on this. Like Mordecai is the thorn in his side. The king has already approved him going out and slaughtering an entire people group, right? So why wouldn't he get this? And he's like, that is a brilliant idea. So it says that night the king could not sleep. So he orders a book. So now we're kind of like changing text a little bit here. Now we're going to the king. So we're back to Xerxes. Xerxes is having trouble sleeping. And of course, this is one of those things that you're like, absolutely a God moment. So he's having trouble sleeping, can't sleep. And he's like, hey, the one thing that's going to put me to sleep is these records, the chronicles. I feel like, don't you have fiction in this time? Like, but the chronicles of my life. So I want to hear all about how many great things that I have done in this nation. So bring me all these chronicles. So they go and they bring him all these chronicles. And as he sees these chronicles, he sees that Mordecai, he remembers that Mordecai was the one who saved him from that plot, that he was going to be killed. And he says, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? I told you in the beginning of this, just yesterday, by the beginning of Esther, Mordecai reminds me of the image that God keeps talking about with the shepherds, right? Mordecai is sitting at the gate, right? He is advising the person underneath of him, right? Which is Esther. And he's shepherding her and he's teaching her and he's training her even when she came out. And you would think he would say, oh, you know what? You're right. I don't want to risk your life. You live and don't worry about us. He didn't. He encouraged her to do what was honorable to the Lord, which was to go save her people. And that there was just a possibility that that's why she's there, is to be the savior of her people, right? So to save them from this thing, because that's what God does. God saves his people. And so he says, what honor and recognition have you given this shepherd? So I just want to put that out there. What honor and recognition? And they're like, none. So this guy who foiled a plot has had no honor or recognition. He's still just sitting at the gate in sackcloth. Nothing has been done for him, they say. So it says, so he's like, obviously he's curious about that. And then we see that Haman comes to the court. So Haman is so excited. He's running himself to the court. And at the same time, Mordecai is getting all this information. So Haman comes to the court and so now King Xerxes is excited. He's like, Haman, I got this guy. And I want you to know, what would you do for a guy who needs all of this honor? And he says, so what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? What should I give to this guy as honor? Like, what will be looked at as honorable and glorious? Like, what will be so good about that? Haman thinks to himself, this is me. This is all about me. Who could be better than me? Who could be getting this honor? So he starts thinking about all these things that he would want. And these are the things that he would want. So again, we're talking about Mordecai, who is a Jewish person, not honored in the land, right? He's a little bit lowly. He's just kind of an average guy. He's sitting at the gate and he's in sackcloth and mourning clothes, right? And this is how he gets honored. It says, have him bring a royal robe the king has worn, a horse the king has ridden, and then a royal crest placed on his head. So now he's down below here and he's lifted up into this place of honor, right? And then it says, let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and then let somebody, like one of the noble princes, let them honor him. The prince will put the robe on him. The prince is going to walk him around all over the place. And then as he's walking around, he's going to proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. So everybody around is going to know that the king honors this guy, right? Like, there's, make no mistake, this guy who was whoever he was is lifted and honored, by the way, above anybody. The only person above this guy right now is the king, because the king is honoring him, putting him in a robe, putting him with a crest on his head, right? Shouting out to all of the people. So he gets all of the honor in the land. And so he says, that's perfect. Go do that to Mordecai. So out of every single person that he could ask and every single person that he could give this honor to, he has Haman giving this honor to Mordecai. So Haman has to go out and he has to do all this for Mordecai, right? So it says afterward, verse 12, afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, because, Mordecai was honored. And then afterward, he returns to the king's gate, exactly where he was, going right back to his post, so to speak, right? So protecting Esther. And it says, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. So he was embarrassed, he was grieving, he was ashamed, he ran with his head down, and he ran all the way home because he had to honor the only man that he actually really desperately wanted to kill. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, well, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you can't stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. So it seems at this point they have recognized that God has elevated them and they lifted those people up, and now Mordecai is sort of done for. Moving down into Esther 7, it says, so the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. So now Haman is grieved, but they still have the banquet to go to. So they go to the banquet, and he says to Esther, once again, for the third time, what is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be granted to you. And she says, if I have found favor, if it pleases you, grant me my life and my people's lives. She said, and this is what's beautiful about her. I and my people have been sold to become, I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated, which she uses that direct quote. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Listen to this request. She's like, I only want our lives. If we had been sold, because right now, and take it for what you will, they're probably not in the greatest of places, although she's the queen. But she's like, if me and my people have been destroyed, I wouldn't even have bothered the sovereign king with this. I wouldn't have bothered with it, because there can be worse fates than this happening to us, right? She says, that distress wouldn't justify disturbing you. That's not bad enough to disturb you. It's only because we're going to be killed, destroyed, and annihilated that I even come to you. So just thinking in some ways about the distress on our lives and what we ask for, like what are we willing to accept and what aren't we willing to accept? And what do we immediately, and I'm not saying we shouldn't go to God, so I please do not hear me saying that, but just to hear her humility in saying that there are certain things that I'm begging for, right? And there are certain things that we would have just accepted as part of our life. And she said, so I just am reaching out to you and I'm begging you that we don't be killed and annihilated, right? And so coming to the Lord in some ways, and he says, we're going to see much later, but he says, I keep asking me, right? Like keep asking. So I don't want to take that away. But he also wants us to work within what he wants, like, right? He wants us to work within his will. I think that's one of the things he desires for us, right? Is to work within his will. And sometimes we might be unwilling to accept certain things that are within his will. And so, killing the people wouldn't be, and killing the entire generation of the Lord's people. And so this is why she asks for what she asks for. So I just want to, obviously I want to be really careful in saying that, but I just noticed that she's willing to deal with a lot more than I think that I am, right? Like sometimes I'm like, Lord, protect me on my trip. And again, not bad, but the Lord might be like, you're just going to have fun. So I just want to be careful with some of those things, because he wants us, and I think he wants us to cry out to him to kind of be more inside of his will. All right. Again, whatever. And then Esther says, so he says, King Xerxes says, who is this person? Who is the one who is trying to kill you? And she says, an adversary and the enemy, this vile Haman. So the one that's against us is Haman, the enemy. Then it says, just as the king returned from the palace court, so he got really upset. He left, and then when he came back, like Haman was going to beg Esther to protect him and to save him. And then when he came back, he was like laying on top of her, and the king was like, "Are you violating her while I'm away?" And he says, "That's it. Like you're done." At the same time, the steward came in and he said, "Hey, Haman just set up a pole to impale Mordecai," and the king's like, "Perfect, impale Haman on it." And so he took Haman's life. And then once again, we see the king's fury subsided. So again, this beckons or hearkens, whatever it is you want to say, to the Lord constantly saying, after he has punished his people, it says, his fury has subsided. After they have drank the cup of his wrath, his fury has subsided, right? So he laid that out, he poured that out, and then his fury has subsided, right? The payment was made. And so we're going to see that here is the same thing with this king. Moving on to 8, it says, in that same day, Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman. So he gave her all of these things. And then he took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and then he presented it to Mordecai. So once again, he's giving Mordecai the highest honor here in this kingdom. He's giving him his signet ring. So the one who was lowly is now lifted up. First, he honored him with all the robes. Now he's giving him his signet ring in order for him to make decisions. We still have this little thing that's left, that they're going out to kill the Israelites. And the king essentially says, anything I say can't really be revoked, right? Like, I can't say, oh, I know I said that, but that's not true anymore. So what they're doing with the power of the Lord, right? So any of the promises that he makes, because he is a good king, he sticks to his promises. See this overlapping with the Lord? Any of the promises he makes, he sticks to. However, right now we're kind of like add an addendum, right? We're like adding on to it. So he says, what I can do is now I can let the Israelites, the Jewish people, defend themselves. So for those who want to come out and just slaughter them, they now have the right to stand up against them. And so everyone will know, we're going to send this out. Once again, it's going to be marked with a signet ring. We're going to send this out to all the nations, all the provinces. And so they're all going to know that on that day, they're going to be able to stand up for themselves and defend themselves. And that is exactly what they did. So they all stood up for themselves. And right inside town, they killed about 500 men, right? That were coming after them and trying to kill them. And they tore through them. And then Queen Esther was like, can we do one more day for any of the outside provinces? And so they did. So the next day, the same thing happened. And this time, thousands who came up against the Israelite people wound up dying because of that. And then after they did all that, they had a celebration, and they are now made to celebrate every year this day in Adar, where Mordecai helped them, Mordecai and Esther, I should say both of them, lifted the people up and prevented them from being slaughtered and allowed them to protect themselves through King Xerxes. And so Mordecai essentially was, I want to say Mordecai was essentially a savior between Mordecai and Esther. And what I think is also really interesting is this idea, and if you guys remember this prophecy, and it fits in, I feel like, with some of these prophecies, they had joy and happiness, right? And one of the prophecies that was told, like in Daniel and Zechariah, was when some of these times come, there will be joy and happiness and celebration. Also, that other one of that image of the two olive trees kind of pouring into the menorah reminds me of this as well, because Queen Esther, right, had the power as the queen. And then we have Mordecai, who was sort of the shepherd, and he was given the signet ring, and the two of them are uplifting the people. So much so that people outside of the nation of Israel then became Israelites and started following the Lord because of what those two did. That is the way we are ending today. And so I feel like this is just a great image of a little piece of prophecy revealed, right? And a little piece of sort of like a literal story, which is again what I think that God does, a literal story of what he's trying to show all throughout the Old Testament with all of the things that he did, right? The Lord is the good king. He is the loving one that will consistently save his people, right? He will consistently protect his people. The shepherds are responsible for going out and letting the people know, right? So like they're like the leaders, the ones who assist the people underneath and tell them what they should be doing according to the Lord, right? Like they're the protectors. So this emulates a lot of all that we've seen in the past and some of the prophecies that we've seen. So take it with what you will, right? Take it as it is. I would love if you shared your thoughts, because I always love when to share your thoughts. And then if this was a blessing to you, I want you to like, share, and subscribe as always. And I want you to always share it with a lot of people, guys. And I want you to keep reading, and I'll see you guys next time.